Hi, welcome to another episode of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my toy collection that I'm going to be talking about today is the G.I. Joe Collectors Club Figure Subscription Service 8.0. So this is the 8th one of these videos I've done, where I've reviewed all of the figure subscription services in order that we've gotten over the last several years. Just to give you a quick recap of what I'm talking about is the G.I. Joe Collectors Club. For the last several years has been the primary source for G.I. Joe figures, since Hasbro hasn't really been supporting the brand all that much. So they've allowed the Collectors Club to produce these exclusive figures. The Collectors Club has given us figures by way of convention sets and a free figure for signing up. Sometimes they just have figures available in their store that members can buy. But for the last several years, they've done these figure subscription services where you commit to buying 12 figures, which they show you in advance, and then they ship them out to you in pairs over the course of 6 months. And then in the final shipment, you get a 13th mystery figure, which nobody knows who that figure is going to be until it arrives in the mail. So the last figure subscription service just wrapped up just a little while ago. It was maybe a month or so ago that I got the final figures, and those were to be the final figures from the Collectors Club, as they have now lost their license with Hasbro. So no G.I. Joes for the foreseeable future. And as I mentioned before, the original plan of the figure subscription service is what they would send them out 2 figures per month. So you'd get figures over the course of 6 months. But because the Collectors Club had lost their license technically at the end of 2018, they were really rushing stuff out. So when it came to figure subscription service 7, it bled right into figure subscription service 8. And by the time we were getting the figures from 8, they were shipping out like almost every single week. We were getting a new shipment. It wasn't until the very last shipment of 3 figures that there was a bit of a delay, and we had to wait about a month before that showed up. So in this video, I'm going to show you all 13 figures from FSS 8. And yeah, so let's get started. So in the first shipment, we got Clutch, and I will call this Clutch version 11. Although that's, I guess, debatable. I think most people get their reference information, such as which version of a character a certain toy is from the website yojo.com. Now, when it comes to certain characters like Clutch, over the years, I think Hasbro had lost the rights to the name Clutch. So for a couple of years, they were calling him Double Clutch. And here you'll see on his display base, they had to call him Lance Clutch Steinberg. So they just put they've got his original code name back, but they had to put it in the middle of his real name. And I assume that's all due to different copyright or trademark issues. So yeah, on the website, I don't think this figure would be listed as version 11. But if you count up all the versions of Clutch and Double Clutch, I think this is where you arrive. So this is a nice figure, even though he's made up of some pretty early parts from the modern era of figures. So if I had to complain, I know some people don't like the way his kind of legs fit into his waist piece there. They kind of they kind of pop out a little bit on the sides here. It's not super natural looking. But yeah, so he's pretty basic, but that would make sense. Clutch is one of the original 13 members of G.I. Joe that came out in 1982. And so early on in the modern era, which started in 2007, they redid all those original 13 figures. So here's the first Clutch figure that came out. So this would have been based on the original 1982 Clutch in his kind of standard military green. But then early on in the 80s, some of the early G.I. Joe characters like Clutch and Grunt, they got re-released in these, I guess you'd call them desert colors. Now it was the exact same figure, just repainted in this tan. So I was going to pull out my vintage tan Clutch from 1984. Unfortunately, with the old figures, I know some people prefer them, but the biggest problem with them is they were constructed with an elastic waistband in the middle that held them together, and those things just rot over time. So it's not a matter of playing with them too much. It's actually, I find the opposite. As soon as you stop playing with them, that elastic gets hard and it snaps. So a whole lot of my vintage G.I. Joes, unfortunately, have snapped in half. But you'll see here, this is the vintage Clutch, and that's what they've recreated here. So you can see by the web gear they went with the holster and everything there, it yeah, it's a pretty good representation of this clutch. Now, the helmet they've used, sorry, I'll bring him back for a second. This was kind of the basic G.I. Joe helmet of the 80s, and there are versions of this in the modern era. I'm not sure why they give Clutch this helmet. It's a little more like detailed, and it's got that weird chin strap which can attach. I actually don't like it very much. You'll see on Clutch here, I got rid of his helmet altogether, this one, and I might do the same with this. I might just choose to display him without a helmet because it's a nice head sculpt. And yeah. Anyway, so this figure here, you can see the head and the vest and the torso are the exact same as the one here they put out in 2008. But they did wisely make a few changes because everybody hated these wrist slits that came on some of the early figures. So they've improved his arms here. You can see that his arms are different. So you don't have that awkward split. Now it's right on his wrist. They've also changed up his legs as well. You can see that he had a knife sheath there and a holster on his foot. Whereas the legs here are a little different. Doesn't make for a huge difference, but it probably, you'll see, I think the legs on this one fit together a little better. So maybe that's why it's a little awkward here, is these legs and this waist piece weren't originally meant to go together. But yeah, overall, for accessories, he came with a little pistol here, machine gun, and I think he came with a pylon, actually, but I've got that tucked away in my spare parts bin. So anyway, this one is, some would consider it maybe a little boring because it's such a basic military figure, but to a lot of people, the tan Clutch was the only one they had growing up, including myself, because my brother Doug owned the green Clutch. So yeah, I was pretty happy to get this version of Clutch in the modern era. And along with Clutch in the first shipment of FSS 8, we got Red Laser version 1. So Red Laser here, I think, is the reason that the final shipment was delayed so much, because they sent this figure to us, but there was a couple problems. They sent it to us on, I think the original base was black, and it might not have had the flag hole. And also, for this flag to work, there's two pieces that snap on the front and the back that hold this cardboard flag in place, and they were missing one of these pieces. So they had to go back to the factory in China to get the replacement base and the missing flag piece. And because they had to wait for that, they told us that they were just going to include that in the final shipment. So that's what caused the month-long delay, which again pissed a lot of people off online, who are pretty easy to get upset. But you know, it wasn't the end of the world having to wait another month for this for the extra pieces here. But yeah, we did get this figure pretty early on in the run, and I think he's pretty cool. So if you're not familiar with this figure, that wouldn't surprise me. So he's a member of the Red Shadows, and in the 80s, over in the UK, G.I. Joe was known as Action Force, and they imported a lot of the early figures over there, and they repackaged them under the name Action Force. And the villains in Action Force were already established as this team called the Red Shadows. So this figure here, what they did, they took the original 82, 83 Cobra Commander figure, who was all in blue with the silver faceplate, and they brought him over there, and they painted him red and black, and they gave him a new name. They called him Red Laser. So yeah, there was an original figure in 83 in the UK of Red Laser, but he was never released in the US, and most people in the US probably never even knew this thing existed until several years later, when the internet made this kind of stuff more easy to discover. So I don't have the vintage UK Red Laser, but you'll see this figure here. What they did is they took this Cobra Commander, which was released a couple years earlier, and this is based on the very original Cobra Commander figure. So it makes sense that what they would do is they would take that, the very original look, and repaint it into Red Laser, which is just what they did back in the vintage days. So you'll see here the torso is the same with the buttons, and the gloves are the same. The only pieces they've changed are the legs. So they didn't do that in the vintage line. The legs were the same. But what they did do in the vintage figure, Cobra Commander had shoes, but they painted like him black up to here, so it looked like he had boots on. So rather than just repaint this one with boots, which would look kind of silly, they actually gave him different legs with full boots on, which I appreciate, because it does make Red Laser a little tall, and they maybe don't fit perfectly with that waist piece, but it helps to differentiate him from Cobra Commander. But legs aside, I actually find it pretty amazing how adding those eyeballs really separate him from Cobra Commander. You really might think that's a different head sculpt, but all it is just paintwork that adds that look to the face. And you can see there on his head, they've got the Red Shadows skull and crossbones logo, the same one that you can see on his flag there. And yeah, I think this figure turned out great. And I would have liked to see more Red Shadow figures work their way into the line. Because if you read the comic books that were published by Devil's Due in the mid to early 2000s, they had started incorporating the Red Shadows into a pretty epic storyline. And yeah, we never really get to see how that all would have panned out. So yeah, this is pretty cool to finally have a Red Shadows figure in the modern era of G.I. Joe. So in the second shipment, we got Bulletproof version 3. And this was probably the one I was maybe least excited about, because I don't know anything about Bulletproof. I never owned the original figure. The original one was released in '92, and then he was repainted almost the exact same, except in brighter colors in 1993. And I had already quit buying Joes back then when I was a kid. So yeah, I have no attachment to this figure whatsoever. Now, oddly enough, I did actually get the vintage of the 1992 figure just not too long ago. I bought him here loose from Strange Adventures, my local comic book shop. He didn't have any of his accessories, but just now owning the vintage figure makes me like this one a little bit more. But you can see they did a pretty good job of recreating the vintage look. You know, it's pretty simple. The colors are pretty much spot on. The kind of green with the tan, I guess you'd call it kind of like digital camo. The grenade bandolier. Now this Bulletproof did have a removable helmet, but I don't have it, so it's kind of tough to compare. But you'll see with this head here, the helmet is molded on, so unfortunately you can't take that helmet off. And this head, it's not a new head. We originally got this head on Dodger. So the club created this head brand new for this figure in their convention set a couple years prior. And they look pretty different, though. Like, if you know they're the same, then you kind of spot it. But on a shelf, you don't necessarily think these two characters look the same. I guess probably the fact that this guy, you know, they're a different race. So yeah, they look a little different. And I don't know if that's the best pick for Bulletproof, but I think it works okay. And since I didn't really have any nostalgic ties to the character, you know, I'm not bent out of shape if it's not a perfect match for his head. I do find he's got a bit of a hunch to him. These pieces maybe don't go super well together. This helmet and that tall collar on the back kind of obstructs, so it's hard for him to look up. But otherwise, a decent, you know, militaristic figure, nothing crazy. And yeah, if you were a Bulletproof fan, I hope you like this new version. And along with Bulletproof in the second shipment, we got Captain Gridiron version 2. And this is based on the 1990 original Captain Gridiron figure. So, it's kind of a surprise even to me, but I actually love this figure. When they first showed all the reveals of the characters that were going to be included in FSS 8, I was really excited by the mock-up they showed of this figure. And I don't really have any nostalgic ties to this guy either. I didn't own the original toy when I was a kid. It came out basically the year I'd stopped collecting G.I. Joe in 1990. And yeah, he appeared a lot in the cartoon series that was produced by Deke, but I'd stopped watching the show by then. I only watched the Sunbow cartoons, so Captain Gridiron was never in that. Yeah, so this is the first Captain Gridiron we've gotten since that original 1990 figure. Now, I do have the 1990 original here. Now, you'll see here they've recreated the colors and I think the look pretty well. The camo is on his boots there. It is here on this version. It's subtle, but you'll see it's there. The gun, he's got the same gun. And here, his kind of gimmick in the old days, he had these football grenades. So what they did here is, you know, they took a football and they painted it silver. And, you know, it doesn't have that little handle on it like these ones do. That make them obviously grenades. But another G.I. Joe figure in the modern era, Red Dog, actually came with a real football, like a brown football. And it works pretty well. They just repainted it silver, and now it's a football grenade. Now, I don't have the helmet of the original here, because I got this secondhand after the fact. So it's hard for me to compare. I think it was pretty goofy and oversized. with a big clear visor on the front. I wish I did have it. I think this one probably reproduces that big, goofy, oversized look pretty well. And they've got that kind of cage on the bottom, which is supposed to recreate like a football helmet kind of look. And he does look silly, but I kind of think he looks awesomely silly. He's got no new parts here. His head underneath. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking on who that is. It's kind of a generic head, but yeah, it wasn't newly created for this figure here. But I think it's a decent choice. And yeah, overall, I think Captain Gridiron turned out really well, and yeah, I like him a lot. So there you go, Captain Gridiron. In the third shipment, we got Lieutenant Claymore version 2, and this is the Cobra Shock Viper Commander. Now this is another character you're probably not familiar with unless you're pretty hardcore into G.I. Joe, because the original figure was not part of the vintage line. He came out only in a convention set from the Collectors Club in 2007, which was one of their last O-ring figures in that old vintage style. So yeah, there was a guy that kind of looked like him that appeared in some of the old cartoons, which I think is what the club had based that original 2007 figure on. And if memory serves, he might have even eventually appeared in some comic books, maybe with the Devil's Due books. I can't recall 100% certainty, but yeah, he's kind of an obscure character. And I'm a little surprised the club would waste a slot in their last figure subscription service, because there were so many characters that fans wanted, and I don't think anybody was clamoring for Claymore. And I could maybe understand if the club thought, well, you know what, he was our creation, kind of. We want to see him done in the modern style, and we've got a really amazing build for him. But I find his build is kind of wonky. Like, his limbs are kind of scrawny. I don't think it really captures the look of the 2007 figure all that well. Like, he's not bad. Like, if Hasbro produced this figure and I bought him for 10 or 12 bucks, I would like him just fine. But at these prices, and when there's so many other characters I would have rather seen, yeah, it's hard to get excited about Claymore here. So he's got an interesting haircut under this helmet here. And the reason for that is that original 2007 figure, they reused the head from Balrog, which is a Street Fighter character. And if you've played Street Fighter, you know that guy's got kind of this weird, I don't know, kind of cornrow and that weird bangs. Anyway, so the old Balrog head from the vintage Street Fighter line, which was a crossover with the G.I. Joe brand, he had this hair sculpted on his head. And so it looked okay. It was kind of a distinct look, so kind of weird to reuse Balrog's head for Claymore, but whatever. But this time around, the head they used is a head that was created by Hasbro for their 50th anniversary line, and they used it on this character here, Tombstone. And you can see here, he was supposed to be missing an eye, so he's got kind of a scar sculpted over his eye, and he's clearly bald. So they took this head and reused it for Claymore. And so you can see he's still got the scar over the eye, but they've downplayed it so he has both eyes. And they just painted that silly haircut right on his bald head. So I don't think it looks very good. And I would have rather them not reuse this head, because this Tombstone was kind of unique when, you know, Hasbro threw us a bone with their 50th anniversary line. They only gave us a handful of new figures, and most of it was all reused parts. So the fact that they gave us a new, unique, named Cobra character with a brand new sculpted head, you know, even though I don't necessarily love Tombstone's figure, it's kind of bland. It was cool that we had a unique guy. And then the fact that the club reused that head, it kind of takes away from the uniqueness a little bit. So, yeah, Claymore is definitely not my favorite in this subscription service, but he's okay. And along with Claymore, we got Fast Draw version 2. Now this is the character I most wanted to see. As it was known to us that the Collectors Club's license was running out, Hasbro wasn't planning on giving us any more figures. The number of figures we were going to get from the club were winding down. I personally was really hoping for Fast Draw, because he's one of the last figures from the original vintage line. The original came out in '87. The club had made almost almost all the figures right up to the 87. So everybody from 82, 83, 84. We've pretty much got all those figures. Fast Draw seemed like the main character we were missing. Plus, he was a favorite of mine as a kid. I loved Fast Draw. But I was worried because he would have required probably a lot of new parts to recreate the vintage look. So I'm really glad they gave us Fast Draw. I think they managed to pull off a pretty decent version of Fast Draw. It's by no means perfect, but it's not bad. So let me show you what we were hoping to get. So here's the vintage Fast Draw. So Fast Draw had this backpack with the missiles on it, and he has two of these. I've only got him displayed with one, but he had these little pistols with the trigger that the hose would attach to the backpack, assuming he would click the trigger and the missiles would launch from his backpack. He had this unique padded outfit that, you know, his whole, all of his legs, his whole torso are covered in that kind of padded gray, not armor per se, but just padding, I guess. And his helmet was really unique, as he's got, see, that blue hose that attached from his mask to his backpack that I guess allowed him to breathe or something. But it had this flip-up feature, and there was his face underneath, which was just really cool. You know, they could have just made him a sculpted head with no moving parts, but the fact that his visor flipped up just really made him unique amongst vintage G.I. Joes. And I liked this figure a whole lot. And yeah, I really wanted him to come out nice. So what we got doesn't quite fit the bill. He might be a little hard to see here, but the backpack they gave us, they had used for Metalhead, who had a similar gimmick, although this is much more true to what Metalhead had, which was the four little missiles coming out of each of these packs. So they had already used that for Metalhead for their convention set a couple of years ago. So they reused that here, which if they weren't going to make new parts to create this backpack, then this is probably as good as they were going to get. So let me get that off of him for a second. And as far as the padded armor, so what they've used here for the torso, like, it works pretty well, and that is the armor or the padding that came on Blowtorch, and also the helmet and the mask come from Blowtorch, and that is what most people didn't like about this figure. As Blowtorch, who is the G.I. Joe flamethrower trooper, you know, he has a very distinct look. And we've already got a bunch of versions of Blowtorch in different colors. And I really would have liked to see Fast Draw be unique, so he didn't just look like a repainted Blowtorch. Unfortunately, that's what they gave us as far as his helmet goes. I look at this and it does look like Blowtorch. It looks more like Blowtorch than Fast Draw. But they did do a good job of changing things up. So his arms, you'll see here, are different than Blowtorch's. His legs are different than Blowtorch's. Plus, they gave him this really cool armor that was originally seen on a Destro figure. So it does make him a little different. And what I like most is, I thought for sure, once we knew we were getting Blowtorch's head and helmet, is that he would have Blowtorch's kind of weird smirky head underneath, because, you know, this head fits with that helmet. You don't really see the head under the helmet that much, so why wouldn't you do that? But what they did here is they actually gave us Airtight's head underneath, which has this kind of hooded look, which this, you know, kind of reminds me of that face, because that's all we ever saw of Fast Draw on the vintage line. It's just his face. I don't know what color hair he has or anything like that. So I'm really happy with this head. It's you know, it's not a cool head per se. It's kind of dorky looking, but I think it's truer to the vintage Fast Draw and does make him stand out from Blowtorch, so he's not just a clone of that guy. And yeah, as far as his little triggers go, there's no wires connecting them, which is unfortunate. And these here, it's not quite the same idea as the vintage pistol. But they took this piece, which was originally, it was supposed to have like Cobra Venom or something that came with the lab rats and probably some other characters. But it works pretty well to recreate his little pistols there. And overall, for a favorite character of mine, I'm pretty satisfied. Obviously, I would have loved if they created all new pieces and gave him a new helmet and all that sort of stuff. But considering what they had to work with, I think this guy turned out kind of awesome. So that's Fast Draw. So in the 4th shipment, we get Overkill. This is Overkill version 8. Now, Overkill is the leader of the Cobra Bats. And the Cobra Bats are the battle android troopers. They were originally released in the vintage line. It was in 85, I think. And they were just Cobra's robot army. I think the main reason that they were created is if you put robots in the cartoons, the G.I. Joe team could actually shoot them and blow them up because you couldn't actually show them shooting Cobra soldiers. So it made sense that there would be robots out on the battlefield. So the Cobra Bats have been part of the G.I. Joe storyline for ages. And it wasn't until 1992 that they created a Bat character, which was supposed to be a unique character, and he was their commander. And that was Overkill. And here is the vintage 1992 Overkill. So yeah, looks a little different. Now this guy here, so he was still supposed to be a complete robot. And I doubt this works anymore, but yeah, he's part of the sound attack or something. And so these would make him talk, and he would say, "Bats attack," and stuff like that. Anyway, so this figure, I didn't own it as a kid because it came out in 92 after I quit buying, but my little brother had this figure. So I don't think this is my brother's. It might be, but I think I might have just acquired this down the road sometime later. But anyway, they did make a bunch of versions of Overkill because, as I said, this is version 8. So this is the only one from the vintage line. But when they made version 2, and that came out in 2003 during the new sculpt years, this is more what he looked like. So he had a human face, but it looked kind of a balaclava or a scarf here. Came up right over his nose. You could only see his eyes. And so he had a robotic kind of body with a human face. And his file card, I think it was at that point when they started describing him as a cyborg. So he was part human and part robot. So that kind of changed the story from the 1992 original. And in the comic books, it was actually established that Overkill, the human part of him, was a saw viper. There was a very famous issue of the G.I. Joe Marvel comic, because people didn't die in it all that often, but there was an episode, or an issue, which was pretty shocking, because Cobra had a bunch of Joe hostages, and they had them all in like a ditch, and a Cobra saw viper, who was just a generic trooper, opened fire on the trench and killed a bunch of named G.I. Joes, which was pretty shocking at the time. So when Devil's Due picked up the G.I. Joe license, they took that character of the saw viper, who was a nobody, had him get injured in battle, and he had to be rebuilt as Overkill. So that name kind of made a little more sense. So yeah, this is Overkill. And he's got no new parts. He's made up mostly. If you look at his legs and arms, they look kind of robotic. But they are repainted from the accelerator suits from the live action movie. So this is the Marlon Wayans under here. Doop. So yeah, this is him in his accelerator suit. So they took those arms, you see those, the shoulder pads there, and the legs, and then he's got a different torso, and I think that's actually some Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow web gear. And then his hands, they did something kind of neat to give him these claws, is the Cobra Commander figure from the live action movie. He was called Dr. Rex, because assuming you've seen that movie, for most of the movie you didn't know that the Doctor was actually going to turn out to be Cobra Commander. And I'm not sure why he didn't have these in the movie, but these claw hands did come with Rex. So Overkill comes with 2 of those. I only have him displayed with 1, because he can't really hold his gun otherwise. So I opted to give him a gun in one hand and a claw in the other. I think it's kind of a neat feature. Anyway, so he's got 2 of those. And then the other really neat thing about him is, knowing that he's supposed to be a cyborg, you can take his helmet off and you can pop his face off. So it's not a whole head, it's just a face mask. And it reveals this kind of metallic Terminator-esque head underneath. So yeah, pretty cool. And that head, even that is not new. They used that for their G.I. Joe Transformer crossover convention set a couple years ago. This is Bludgeon. So he was a Transformer character. And yeah, they used that metallic skull. This was a new piece used for him. And yeah, I didn't think we'd ever see it reused anywhere because it wouldn't make sense. But they reused it here for Overkill. And yeah, I think it turned out really cool. So there you go. That's Overkill. And along with Overkill, we got Recoil version 2. So this is based on the 1989 original Recoil. So only the second version of Recoil we've ever gotten. And I think this guy looks pretty cool. Again, he's very believably militaristic. Nothing too crazy in science fiction or colorful about him. Not to say I don't like that element of G.I. Joe, but sometimes it's nice just to get a good old-fashioned soldier. So Recoil was a controversial figure here. I didn't really have a dog in the fight because I didn't have the vintage Recoil when I was a kid. He did come out in '89, but yeah, I didn't have him, even though I was still buying G.I. Joes pretty regularly then. That was the year I think I stopped being a completist, and then I really kind of fizzled out the following year. But this does a pretty good job of recreating the vintage Recoil. But let me haul him out here. So this is the '89 Recoil. So he had a couple of unique things about him. So he had this kind of pack with him. I'm not sure what's going on there. He had baby blue weapons. He had that rifle as well as this weird double gun thingamajig. And then he had this helmet, which was sculpted right on there. It wasn't removable. And I always kind of described it as a Devo helmet. You know that video for Whip It? That's what he reminds me of, with those glasses and that weird helmet. So it was kind of a unique look. And the club did not give us any new pieces here. So they did not sculpt a new Devo helmet, which is what I was really hoping and what I feel Recoil really needs to be Recoil. But you'll see here they did recreate his case. They recreated both of his weapons, so the rifle, and he also came with the weird double gun, which I have it tucked away somewhere. And they decided to cast them in black, which makes more sense. It looks a lot more believable, but some people were upset because they felt the powder blue was, that was kind of Recoil's thing, so they would have liked to seen the powder blue weapons again. I'm of two minds about it. I do agree that it is kind of, it screams Recoil when you see those baby blue guns, but they are kind of silly. So, and then for the backpack, I think they found a pretty good pack to recreate the look of this one with a little bent antenna there. Now for the head, so they gave him the green glasses, and this helmet here, we first saw this in the movie line for Retaliation. I think it came on Agent Mouse. And underneath there, he's got his blonde hair. So the vintage figure was blonde. And so I think they did the best they could. There's not too many heads with glasses. This head originally came on Lifeline. So here's Lifeline with the glasses. And Lifeline had black hair, so they look different in that regard. And they did reuse this head with glasses for Pathfinder as well, for an earlier figure subscription service, and he also had dark hair. So Recoil's at least different in that sense that he's got blonde hair. But so even though they couldn't give us a new head with the standard Devo helmet, they didn't give us the powder blue weapons. The main thing I'm really surprised about is the choice to change the camo. Like if he was wearing this outfit in that exact kind of, I don't know, tan suit with that digital blocky camo with that dark green, I don't think people would be as bothered by the missing helmet or the blue guns, but they gave him this different look. Like I would say completely different. It's still kind of a digital camo. You have to kind of get up close to see how it's kind of blocky. But, it's green on green. Neither shade of green really matches. Just kind of an odd choice. Now, I still think when you look at this figure, it's clearly Recoil, so I'm happy with it. Actually, the more I have it, the more I look at it and play with it, I like it more and more. But I do wish he had this helmet. But what are you going to do? So, that's Recoil. In the fifth shipment, we get Munitia version 2. So she's a relatively new character. The first and only other version of her came out in 2009. And you might think that would be what we call the modern era figures, because as I've said multiple times, the modern era started in 2007. But the thing is, Hasbro was still producing a couple of O-ring figures up into 2009. They had a setup called the Direct to Consumer, or DTC, So figures had stopped appearing in stores, but you could order directly from Hasbro, and they had kind of promised some of these figures. And Munitia was one of the last O-ring figures offered. And if I remember correctly, Hasbro might have opted not to do that last bit of direct-to-consumer, and then the Collectors Club might have picked it up and ran with it. And I think you had to maybe get them through the Collectors Club. But anyway, that's the only version of Munitia we've ever had before. Now, she was a character that was created for the comic books. She was a member of the Plague, which if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that the Plague was a concept introduced in the Devil's Due comics, was to create a team of 13 elite Cobras, which was kind of the answer to G.I. Joe's original team of 13. And yeah, this figure I think is pretty awesome. Like, the body is made up of all existing parts. I think you've probably got some Baroness and some Agent Helix and stuff in there. But this head, which is kind of a bizarre head with those crazy goggles, this is the only new head that we got in Figure Subscription Service 8. So that's pretty crazy when you consider we've got, I think, maybe 5 new heads in past ones. So yeah, to only give us one, you know, it's got to be a good one. And I think this one is very good. It's very unique. And it does Munitia justice. I don't think you could have just repainted a Baroness head or something and tried to tell us that that was Munitia. I really think she needed this new head more than pretty much anybody else in Figure Subscription Service 8. So, yeah, I don't have any past versions to show you. I don't have that 2009 figure. But it is nice to have another member of the Plague, so I can display her with Blackout and Guillotine and Interrogator and some of those other guys. So yeah, overall, nice figure. That is Munitia. And along with Munitia, we got Payload version 6. So Payload, this was a character a lot of fans were hoping for, but like Fast Draw, they thought, well, his pieces are just going to be too unique. The club isn't going to be able to pull it off. Yet they did. I think they gave us a pretty good version of Payload here. One of the neatest things about Payload was his card art. All these Figure Subscription Service figures come on, you know, single blister cards. I don't have the package here to show you, but he had some really nice artwork on his card. That aside, though, he is a nice looking figure, and we really needed him because he was one of the figures that came out in '87 along with the original hardtop, and those two characters came packaged with the Defiant space shuttle. So, as I said in my review when I talked about hardtop, I didn't have either of these guys as a kid because that shuttle was a big, expensive vehicle, and unfortunately I didn't have it. So these are my first versions ever of these guys. Now, with hardtop, there weren't so many versions of them before, but Payload, as I mentioned, this is version 6, but all those other versions, version 2, 3, 4, 5, they all came out late in the vintage line, and like I had stopped collecting by then. So yeah, this is the only version of Payload that we've got in the modern era. And so yeah, he's a character that we really needed. Now the mustachioed head, that it looks like the vintage one. It works really well here. And it's not a new head, but a lot of people don't have it in their collections, including myself, because the only place it was available was in a box set that Hasbro did with San Diego Comic-Con, where it was a blend of all of the Hasbro properties. So there was a G.I. Joe, a Transformer, Rom the Space Knight, and a Visionary. And this head here was on the Visionary. So yeah, if a lot of people didn't probably feel the need to buy that set if they only like G.I. Joe, they didn't really need a Visionary and Micronauts and Rom and all that stuff. So yeah, it looks brand new, and that's kind of a nice piece. The body's made up of reused parts. Most of it is from this character, the Data Viper. Now the Data Viper was a wholly unique character that came out a few years ago, and here he is. So this is Data Viper. So you see there the legs, the torso, the waist. I think pretty much everything is borrowed from the Data Viper from the neck down, including this crazy kind of contraption armor that he's got here, which is his spacesuit. And that's what I wanted to get to next. As cool as Data Viper was, you just couldn't handle this guy. Like, you touch him and he just tends to fall apart. Like these wrist things here, it's just 2 components that snap onto his wrist and connected by this little hose, which just falls apart very easily. God forbid you want to turn his arms. You know, these things which lift up, they tend to come undone. On his backpack, he's got this removable drone, and this thing comes off as a drone. He's got like a satellite dish, and I don't even know what the hell this thing is. Anyway, like, he's very busy. So he looked cool, and I actually really liked, if you take this helmet off, he had a really cool head under there. Something kind of unique. Anyway, that aside. So, Payload suffers from all the same problems. Like, these things on his wrist, you'll see I simplified it. I just have the one piece on there rather than he came with all of this. He came with the two pieces and the hose, but you couldn't even look at it without it falling apart. Another thing here is, so this thing also kind of falls apart. It didn't come with all the extra parts. It didn't have the satellite dish and the drone and everything. It just looked like that on the back. But this Data Viper body did not seem to work with this head once you took that contraption off, because he had like a real like this is how it sits, like a real kind of pencil neck giraffe looking thing, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like, it doesn't look so bad when you've got his armor on, not as noticeable, but like I said, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And so I pulled out that scarf. This actually came from a different toy line altogether. This is from Marauder Task Force. So I took this scarf. It doesn't really match his astronaut outfit, but I needed something to cover up that goofy looking neck. But that aside, I think Payload was a figure that a lot of people were really excited about, and he's probably a highlight for a lot of people in this particular figure subscription service. Not so much for me. Like, I think he's fine, but since I didn't have him as a kid or anything, I don't have any attachment to the character. But yeah, it's a decent representation of that original 87 figure. I almost forgot to show you, Payload did actually come with a space helmet. He wouldn't do very well in outer space with no helmet. So yeah, he did have this removable helmet, which originally came with an Ace figure, I believe. So that also helps to hide the neck problem. So yeah, there you go. A lot of people will probably choose to display him like that. But I choose to keep the helmet off because I like that mustache so much. In the 6th and final shipment, we got Blizzard version 3. So this is based on the 1988 original figure of Blizzard. And I would say really there's only two versions of Blizzard. The secondary version that came out in 97, which was kind of between lines, because most people would say the vintage line stopped in 94, and then the new sculpt years started in 2002. But in between there, Hasbro was putting out a lot of repaints, and they didn't seem to really care a whole lot if they were changing names of guys. So they took a version of Frostbite, and they just called it Blizzard. But yeah, clearly it was Frostbite. So I would say this is more like Blizzard version 2. But even that is debatable, because the thing is, we were supposed to get this final figure subscription service all shipped to us, and then the club kind of gave us one last swan song, and they called it the final 12 figures. The final 12 figures didn't have any new parts. It was just all repaints, mostly intended to fill in some sublines for people that really liked the sublines like Tiger Force and Sonic Fighters and stuff like that. And so they were repainting Blizzard here in his Tiger Force colors, because in the UK, Blizzard had a Tiger Force repaint. He didn't have that in North America. But anyway, so we were supposed to get that after this figure. But due to the shipping delay because of Red Laser's flag issue, we actually ended up getting the final 12 first. So if you were going to say this was version 3 and this is version 4, technically maybe this is version 3 and this is version 4 now. I don't really know. But yeah, so there's Tiger Force Blizzard. It's the exact same figure as this, just in these kind of Tiger Force colors. So I thought this was a neat figure, but like I said, that was only available in the UK, so I never had that vintage figure. I had one that looked sort of like this. So here is the original 88 Blizzard. And this was another character I liked a lot when I was a kid. He had a whole bunch of accessories. I don't have them displayed with all of them here. He had a couple of guns. He had these removable snowshoes. He had a backpack here with skis that were detachable, and this whole backpack, it had some little handlebars attached to it, and it could be used as kind of like a sled. And then his most unique piece was this helmet. And I always liked my G.I. Joes to have removable helmets. So underneath here, he had a unique head sculpt. There you go. He's a handsome fella. Nice haircut. Anyway, I like Blizzard a lot, and I often played with him with the helmet or without. But I liked having that option. But truth be told, nostalgia aside, this helmet is pretty ridiculous. Like, it's way too big. It looks pretty goofy. It looked pretty cool on the card art, and the card art probably represented what this helmet was supposed to be. And this just didn't really work. Trying to make this kind of helmet removable on a figure this small, I just don't really think they pulled it off. I really wish the club had tried to replicate it but do a better job. But instead, the club gave us this head, which doesn't have a removable helmet at all. So scale-wise, this helmet is probably more realistic than this big goofy thing. But because he was a favorite character of mine, I was really hoping he'd get a unique head sculpt. And it doesn't help that we got this head sculpt so many times in the last couple of years. If you watched my other reviews, you will have seen where it came from before. The club originally created it brand new for Airborne, which is part of their Sky Patrol box set. And then we very quickly got it again on Scoop. And Scoop in the vintage line also had a somewhat similar helmet, but it was removable. So now all three of these guys who had removable helmets in the vintage line, now they're all stuck with the same head, and the helmet doesn't even come off. I don't know who it most looks like. Maybe Airborne, but anyway, it's an okay choice for all of them, but I really wish Blizzard had a unique piece. Otherwise, he's made up of existing parts. It's a lot of nice parts. He'd probably be hard to play with if you really wanted to take him out in the snow, because he does tend to drop things fairly easily, and that big coat makes him pretty bulky. Like this backpack, there you go. The backpack's going to fall off. It doesn't convert to a sled, but it does have room for skis and ski poles, which come off. This jacket, I think we've got it a couple of times. Off the top of my head, though, I know it came with another club figure, Big Bear of the October Guard, back in Figure Subscription Service 2. So yeah, there's nothing really new or unique about Blizzard here. But it all comes together pretty well. And I think it does an adequate job of recreating the vintage Blizzard. So this is a character, him and Fast Draw were both two characters that I really was hoping would get redone. And so I'm glad that we got them. The only guy that I really, really miss, who was a unique G.I. Joe character who came out in kind of the later years of my Joe collecting, was Lightfoot. We never got him, but Blizzard and Fast Draw were up there as well, so I'm glad we at least got those two guys. So yeah, that's Blizzard. And along with Blizzard in the sixth and final shipment, we got Bushido version 3. And so this is based on the 1993 original Bushido. He was a member of Ninja Force, so he is known as a snow ninja. I don't know what you need a snow ninja for, but that's what he was. Anyway, I don't have the original 93 figure to show you, but I do have the 1994 version 2, which is the exact same figure. It was just repainted. And repainted might not be the exact right word. He was remolded in this kind of weird color change plastic. That was the whole gimmick with the Shadow Ninjas. They made a bunch of these guys, and they were you put them in like cold water or warm water, and he would change from a kind of a bright blue to totally white. So here, I think he's more blue than white, but it's pretty faded one way or the other. I'm not sure he still works or not, but yeah, so that's the only version of Bushido I had. He's not a character I had as a kid, because he came out in the 90s when I was already done collecting. This belonged to my brother. So anyway, this figure, you can see, does a decent job of recreating him. Like, with that unique helmet that Bushido had, which was attached to his head. It was not removable, but it was pretty unique. It's got this kind of weird, I don't know, teeth sticking out the front and that weird design in the front. I wouldn't describe it as a samurai helmet. I don't know what you would describe it as. But the club, I don't know, they just didn't have the budget, I guess, to make any new parts. So what they did is they gave us this samurai helmet, and you've already seen that once in this review. Here it was. It came on Bludgeon, that's Transformer skeleton guy. So they took the same helmet and just tweaked it a little bit. So the helmet is removable, and yeah, they added that face piece with the kind of tusks and the horns. So it's way more oversized than the vintage helmet. You know, doesn't match up perfectly, but you can tell who it's supposed to be, obviously. And yeah, so this is Bushido. So it's kind of nice to actually get a Bushido with a removable helmet when he never had that in the vintage line. It's kind of the opposite of the Blizzard problem. And yeah, this head, I believe it was Ace. So it looks different enough because Ace had brown hair. But overall, he works pretty good. His body is made up of existing Ninja parts. And yeah, comes out all right. So I wasn't really a Ninja Force fan. Wasn't really clamoring for this figure. But I know a lot of people were. So yeah, there's Bushido. And this here is Banzai version 2. And he is based on the 1993 original. This was the 13th mystery figure in Figure Subscription Service 8. And due to the delay, since the last shipment came after the whole shipment of the final 12, he is technically the last G.I. Joe figure we got from the club. So possibly the last G.I. Joe figure, maybe ever. Not to say we won't get G.I. Joes at some point, but the G.I. Joe figures that come out next, they could be 6 inches tall, or they could be, 5 points of articulation. I don't know. This could very well be the last figure in what we call the modern era of G.I. Joes. So it's kind of a shame. But everybody pretty much knew this was the figure we were going to get. Usually the 13th figure was a surprise. The club would give you a couple of vague hints and people would debate about it for months. When it comes to this figure, they told us very early on, even before Figure Subscription Service 7 had shipped, that the mystery figure for number 8 was going to be one of the missing members of Ninja Force. And there really wasn't any other options. It could have potentially been a Snake Eyes, but we didn't really think we'd get Snake Eyes because we already have 1,000 different versions of Snake Eyes. And Banzai was the unique character. I think he was the only unique character that we needed. So we pretty much knew this was how it was going to be. We just didn't know how it was going to turn out. There was all kinds of speculation about how they would recreate the mask, which was kind of unique on the vintage figure. Let me break him out here. So here's the only other version of Banzai that exists from 1993. So yeah, he has this kind of crazy, goalie mask or something. And bare-chested with all his pink weapons strapped on. His weird paint splatter, pink pants. He had a bunch of pink weapons, like a couple of pink swords, pink axe. Here I've got his pink sword displayed. And then he's got this rooted ponytail with real hair. I think the only other time we saw that in the vintage line was on Zanzibar. So, yeah, kind of a unique character, and everybody was curious about how this new version would turn out. And I gotta tell you, for a character that I had no ties to and who I thought was pretty stupid looking, I actually kind of really love this figure. I think he turned out kind of awesome. The head sculpt they went with, it's different, but it's actually a repaint of a Storm Shadow head we got in 2010 for the Pursuit of Cobra line. And I actually didn't buy that Storm Shadow. I already have plenty of Storm Shadows, and this one I don't think brought anything unique enough that warranted me getting it. But he has this weird tuft of hair coming out the back, which is kind of an odd choice, but it works well for Banzai. Rather than giving him the rooted ponytail, they just painted that tuft of hair blonde. And yeah, even though the head's different, it's kind of wrapped up. It's, I think, a lot better than what a lot of people were expecting. We thought we were going to get the same maybe hockey mask we saw on Chaos, or the Blind Master figure had a removable kind of kabuki mask, and we thought that would get repainted pink. And the way seeing this in hand, I think this probably turned out way better than any of those proposed versions would have looked. And like the bare-chested version, he looks tough, he looks menacing, which I would not say this guy looked menacing. And like he has no definition in his muscles or anything, kind of goofy looking. This guy looks tough. The pants, there's probably some purists out there that really want the pink paint speckle. I don't think that would have ruined this figure, but I think it's kind of cool they didn't go that route. Again, it might take a little convincing for you to think this guy is a badass ninja. So I think getting rid of the speckled pink paint was a good idea. But yeah, I like this web gear on him. It shows how he's got multiple weapons, throwing stars, knives. His sai here can be stored. He's got storage for both sides. You'll see on his belt there on either side. So he's got 2 of them, one in hand, so he can store them both that way. He's got 2 swords on the back there. And yeah, overall, I just think this was a really cool figure of kind of a goofy character. So yeah, there you go. Possibly the last G.I. Joe figure in a good long time. Banzai. So those are the 13 figures from the G.I. Joe Collectors Club Figure Subscription Service 8.0. The last figures that we're getting from the Collectors Club. So it's kind of sad to see them go. If you've watched all my videos, I tend to be, I don't know, easily pleased. Like some of these figures have their problems, and some people online have just kind of trashed every single one. But I'm generally pretty happy with the figures we've got. I would say easily 80% of the G.I. Joe Collectors Club figures have been really good. I've really enjoyed getting them. So yeah, it's going to be different this year. Not only getting no subscription service, but no convention set, no free sign-up figure. Yeah, so hopefully Hasbro gets behind the brand soon. They've pretty much told us they don't plan to do anything with it until the next live-action movie, which is at least a year or so out. So probably nothing for a little while. Anyway, if you enjoyed my video, please hit the like button. Leave me a comment. I really appreciate it when you do. I'm happy to answer any questions or just talk about this stuff. And yeah, make sure to subscribe to my channel. So thanks a lot for watching, and until next time.